The night of the 22nd, 23rd of January 1879, South Africa. One of the most celebrated actions in the history of the British Army, the Battle of Rorke's Drift. Less than 150 British soldiers successfully held off repeated attacks by 4,000 Zulus. It was made even more famous by the 1963 film Zulu. The film starred Stanley Baker and a young Michael Caine as the two officers, Lieutenants Chard and Bromhead, commanding the small band of soldiers defending the mission station at Rorke's Drift. Now, while Zulu is not 100% historically accurate, it is a great film, and it got me, and probably many of you, into the Anglo Zulu Wars in the first place. What it did get right was that the officer commanding the defence at Rorke's Drift was Lieutenant John Chard, although he didn't look very much like Stanley Baker. So what I want to do is tell you a little bit more about Lieutenant Chard in real life. Where did he come from? How did he end up commanding at Rorke's Drift? And what happened to him afterwards? Near the end of the film, after the fighting, Stanley Baker, playing Chard, delivers the immortal line, "I only came up to build a bridge." It reveals a professional soldier quietly getting on with his duty, and that is actually a fair reflection of the man in real life too. Despite having been in the army for 10 years, he'd never seen any action. Also, he'd only arrived in South Africa just over 2 weeks before he was thrust into command and fame at Rorke's Drift. Surviving the battle, awarded the Victoria Cross, he then continued to serve for over 20 years, during which time he never saw another battle. In many ways, he was an accidental hero, but when the chips were down, he stepped up. Born at Pennycross near Plymouth, Devon on the 21st of December 1847, his family were wealthy West Country gentry. The 1861 census recorded 5 servants living at the family home in Plymouth. Elder brother William Wheaton Chard would end up serving in the Royal Fusiliers for 30 years, including the Second Anglo-Afghan War, and rose to colonel, commanding the 1st Battalion in Egypt and India. His younger brother, Charles Edward Chard, became rector at Hatch Beecham in Somerset, and we'll come back to him later in our story. Educated at Cheltenham and Plymouth New Grammar Schools, and then with a private tutor, young John Chard finally attended the Royal Military Academy Woolwich, the training school for officers of the Royal Engineers and Royal Artillery. He was commissioned in July 1868, joining the Engineers. There were 2 further years of training at Chatham, followed by a posting to Bermuda in 1870 to build fortifications at the Naval Dockyard near Hamilton. He returned to England around 1874 for his father's funeral, and then spent roughly 2 years conducting fortification work at Malta. By the late 1870s, he was once more back in England, before departing for South Africa in early December 1878. John Chard was now 31, and still a lieutenant after 10 years' service. He landed at Durban on the 4th of January 1879 and was appointed to command a detachment of No. 5 Field Company Royal Engineers. They would be supporting the main invasion column, which crossed the Buffalo River at Rorke's Drift on the 11th of January. He, accompanied by half a dozen sappers, had gone ahead of the rest of the company to Rorke's Drift, with orders to repair the pontoon bridges that had taken a beating as the main invasion force under Lord Chelmsford had passed over them. And thus it was that on the 19th of January he arrived at the mission station, which would make him famous just 3 days later. On the morning of the 22nd of January 1879, Chard received an order that his sappers were required at the main camp at Isandlwana inside Zululand. Not certain if he was needed personally, he loaded 5 sappers into a wagon and set off on horseback alongside them for the 10-mile journey. With the wagon making slow progress along the rough track, he rode on ahead and arrived at the camp to find that Lord Chelmsford had famously split his force and headed east with half his army to locate the Zulus. It was a disastrous decision. Cue the film Zulu Dawn. Chard reported to the headquarters tent, only to be informed that whilst his men were needed, he was not, and he was ordered back to Rorke's Drift to await the rest of his company still marching up through the British colony of Natal, and then finish off the pontoons. Just as he was preparing to leave Isandlwana, a report arrived stating that Zulus were appearing on the heights to the north. Chard borrowed a field glass and could plainly see a large force of Zulus moving to the left above the camp. This sighting made him worry that the Zulus might, as he later wrote, make a dash at the pontoons, prompting him to hurry back to Rorke's Drift. On his way back, Chard met Colonel Durnford riding in from Natal with his column and informed him of the Zulu movements. Shortly afterwards, he encountered his men, still struggling along with their wagon. Worried that they may be caught by the Zulus all by themselves in the open, he ordered them to climb out and march swiftly to catch up the rear of Durnford's column. Within a few hours, they would all be dead. The Zulus that he'd seen were part of the huge Zulu army that encircled and then annihilated the British at the camp. By the way, if you love learning about British history, then sign up for my weekly newsletter. There's a link in the description, and I'll also post one at the end. And now, back to the story. Turning the wagon around, he headed back to the river, accompanied by his valet and an African driver. Chard arrived back at Rorke's Drift at approximately 10 AM. Crossing, using the pontoon, he then rode the quarter of a mile to the mission station to report to the garrison commander, Major Spalding of the 24th Foot. Upon hearing his report, Spalding decided to ride to Helpmarker, 15 miles back inside Natal, to hurry up 2 companies of his regiment who was supposed to be coming to augment his command. There was a brief discussion as to whether Chard or Lieutenant Gonville Bromhead of the 24th, who were guarding the depot, was the most senior officer to take temporary command in Spalding's absence. This is another great moment in the film, when Stanley Baker faces off with Michael Caine. Actually, it was Major Spalding who made the decision, and he did so by simply consulting the army list. Interestingly, Bromhead had actually purchased his commission as an ensign in 1867, the year before Chard had been commissioned. However, in the Royal Engineers and Royal Artillery, the scientific corps of the army, all officers enter with the rank of lieutenant. It wasn't until 1871 that Bromhead had been promoted from ensign to lieutenant, and therefore, as he consulted the list, Spalding saw that Chard had seniority by 3 years. Turning to Chard, he delivered the wonderful line, "I see that you are senior, so you will be in charge, although of course nothing will happen, and I shall be back again this evening early." Nothing will happen. How wrong could he have been? But with those reassuring words, Spalding rode off and Chard headed back to his tent by the river, where he had a comfortable lunch and began writing a letter home, completely unaware that just 10 miles away, the British garrison at Isandlwana was being annihilated by the Zulus. In the film, Chard is supervising the construction of the pontoon bridge, accompanied by Ivor Emmanuel, who's complaining that some of the men should have been at choir practice, when riders gallop in from Isandlwana to convey the news of the Zulu victory. In reality, with no sappers available, no work was actually taking place, but there was a guard consisting of a sergeant, Thomas Williams, and 6 privates from B Company, 2nd Battalion, 24th Regiment of Foot, along with about 50 Africans from the Natal native contingent, at the drift when the riders did indeed appear at around 3:30 PM. They delivered the astounding news that the British camp had been wiped out, and the even more worrying news that 4,000 Zulus were now heading to the mission station here at Rorke's Drift, which was defended by less than 150 British soldiers, including over 30 who were patients in the hospital. At this stage, the ferryman, a man by the name of Daniels, offered to defend the ponts. Sergeant Williams was keen to join him with his half a dozen men. Now, a similar discussion takes place in the film, although the sergeant had been replaced by Corporal Allen. There's no record of Chard responding as he does in the film, "This is a situation you think an engineer officer can't handle." Indeed, he left the party to guard the drift before recalling them a little while later. In the meantime, he rode back to the mission station to see what was going on, with his valet, Sapper Robson, following behind on the wagon. By the time he arrived at Rorke's Drift, he found that preparations to defend the station were already in hand, being overseen by Acting Commissary James Langley Dalton, who had persuaded Lieutenant Bromhead that it was better to stand and fight than be caught retreating in the open. Now, Chard as officer commanding could have overruled Dalton, but instead he concurred and then used his engineering skills to enhance the defences already being established. Chard, for instance, paced out the line of barricades. He also decided to incorporate a calf pen into the defence but concluded that they lacked the men to include the cattle kraal. He specifically identified a rocky ledge as a natural advantage, noting that building the barricade along its top would create a challenging rampart roughly 7 feet 3 meters high, almost impassable to any attacking Zulus, and so it proved during the forthcoming battle. With time running out and the Zulu army sighted by lookouts, the men of the Natal native contingent decided that enough was enough and bolted. With the NNC gone, Chard was reduced to a command of 139 British soldiers, including 35 patients in the makeshift hospital. Let's just pause and reflect. He had been in Africa 2 weeks. In a 10-year military career, he'd never heard a shot fired in anger. And now, he was about to take on 4,000 Zulus. The perimeter that he had created could no longer be adequately manned, and so he now ordered a second line of defence, a wall made of army biscuit boxes across the inside of the compound, to act as a tighter fallback position. They'd only just managed to complete this secondary defence when the Zulus launched their first attack. Through the night of the 22nd of January and into the early hours of the 23rd, Chard led his tiny garrison as it held off repeated and determined attacks from a force of 4,000 Zulus. As the night wore on, he forced his exhausted men to build an 8-foot-high conical pyramid of mealie bags as a final redoubt. Placing his wounded men inside, Chard prepared for the worst. But that moment never came. The Zulus too were exhausted, and as the night wore on, their attacks started to die down. As dawn broke, there was no sign of the Zulus, and Chard now tentatively sent out patrols to collect discarded weapons and clear bodies from around the barricades. It was at this moment in the film that an exhausted Bromhead, played by Michael Caine, having fought his first action, asks Chard what it felt like the first time he'd fought a battle. The response from Chard: "The first time? You think I could stand this butcher's yard more than once? I told you, I came up here to build a bridge." Suddenly, just as in the film, the Zulus once more appeared on a rise overlooking Rorke's Drift. However, unlike the film, there was no singing a salute to fellow braves. They had had enough, and they'd also seen the remnant of Chelmsford's army advancing back out of Zululand. They simply drifted away. The Battle of Rorke's Drift was over. Lieutenant John Chard was one of 12 defenders at Rorke's Drift mission station to be awarded the Victoria Cross. He, along with the rest of the defenders, remained at Rorke's Drift for several weeks, reinforced by a considerable part of Chelmsford's force. There were no further Zulu attacks. However, sleeping in the open, exposed to the rain and mud, the health of the enlarged garrison deteriorated. Chard was haunted by the events he'd witnessed, frequently tossing and turning and crying out in his sleep. He eventually succumbed to fever. He recovered in time for Chelmsford's second invasion of Zululand, and was present at the final battle of the war at Ulundi on the 4th of July 1879. By then, he'd been promoted to captain and brevet or temporary major, both of those promotions backdated to immediately after Rorke's Drift. Following the defeat of the Zulus at Ulundi, he was presented with his Victoria Cross by Chelmsford's replacement, General Sir Garnet Wolseley. Wolseley was not impressed by Chard, writing afterwards, quote, "A more uninteresting or more stupid fellow I never saw. Ouch." But then the General, and many since, did not agree with the award of so many VCs to the men at Rorke's Drift anyway. They only fought fiercely, he thought, because they had no other option. Oh, and Wolseley had never been awarded the Victoria Cross himself. Sour grapes? I'll let you decide. Whatever the view on the number of VCs awarded, the view of Chard as a pretty dull, plodding, good chap was widespread. His company commander from the Royal Engineers, Captain Walter Jones, noted that Chard remained remarkably modest and unmotivated by his fame, preferring to placidly smoke his pipe, rather than to use his influence to seek out higher appointments. However, not everyone had such low opinions of him. Upon his return to Britain in October 1879, Chard was summoned to meet Queen Victoria at Balmoral. The Queen enjoyed the company of her gallant officer, not least his modest and unassuming manner. She gave him a gold signet ring and invited him back the following year. The remainder of Chard's military career consisted of a succession of peacetime appointments that offered little of the excitement he'd experienced in Africa. He rarely spoke of his time at Rorke's Drift, preferring to smoke his pipe quietly in the corner of the officers' mess. Returning to duty at Devonport in January 1880, he was posted to Cyprus in December 1881, and then returned to England as a full major in early 1887. For the next 5 years he was stationed at Fulwood Barracks, Preston, before heading off to Singapore in December 1892. Promoted to Lieutenant Colonel during his 3 years in the Far East, he returned to his final posting as Commanding Royal Engineer at Perth in Scotland in 1896. That same year, and now a colonel, the pipe-smoking Chard was diagnosed with cancer of the tongue. Despite an operation to remove his tongue, and somehow he was still able to speak afterwards, the cancer spread, and in the summer of 1897 he returned to his family roots in the southwest of England. By now his brother Charles, who was 9 years his junior, was the vicar at Hatch Beecham, about 17 miles southeast of Taunton, the county town of Somerset. The same county town, by the way, where I was born. Chard, who'd never married, moved in with his brother for his final months. Colonel John Rouse Merriott Chard VC died on the 1st of November 1897, just short of his 50th birthday. He was buried in the churchyard at his brother's church, and amongst the floral tributes was a wreath of laurel leaves from Queen Victoria, bearing the handwritten inscription, "A mark of admiration and regard for a brave soldier from his sovereign." In many ways, John Chard was an unremarkable soldier who was thrust into command and rose to that challenge at Rorke's Drift. I think he probably would have concurred with Stanley Baker's line in Zulu, "I just came up here to build a bridge." If you enjoy learning about British history, not just the battles, but wider events and people across the centuries, then you might enjoy my weekly newsletter. Recently I've done articles on the history of Tower Bridge, and also the anti-German riots in British cities during World War I. Get your copy by clicking on the link in the description, and join me as I share more fascinating stories from British history.